Welcome to Insights at the Edge, produced by Sounds True. My name's Tami Simon. I'm the founder of Sounds True, and I'd love to take a moment to introduce you to the new Sounds True Foundation. The Sounds True Foundation is dedicated to creating a wiser and kinder world by making transformational education widely available. We want everyone to have access to transformational tools such as mindfulness, emotional awareness, and self-compassion, regardless of financial, social, or physical challenges. The Sounds True Foundation is a nonprofit dedicated to providing these transformational tools to communities in need, including at-risk youth, prisoners, veterans, and those in developing countries. If you'd like to learn more or feel inspired to become a supporter, please visit SoundsTrueFoundation.org. You're listening to Insights at the Edge. Today, my guest is Steve Macadam. Steve served for 12 years as CEO and president of EnPro Industries, a $1.4 billion publicly traded company. Steve is also one of the lead presenters and CEOs, part of Sounds True's new Inner MBA program. This is a program we're producing in partnership with LinkedIn, Wisdom 2.0, and a division of NYU called Mindful NYU. It's a 9-month certification program that begins in the middle of September 2020, runs through May of 2021. A fully virtual option is available, as well as scholarships, and you can learn more at www.innermbaprogram.com. I'm so happy I had this chance to feature on Insights at the Edge Steve Macadam, because he's really a thought partner for me with what type of training best supports a new type of business. A business that focuses equally on human flourishing as well as financial performance. Here's my conversation with Steve Macadam. It's a great joy for me to be speaking with Steve Macadam. He is such an unusual business leader. Recently, when we were together in front of a live audience at an Inner MBA hub at Wisdom 2.0, I said in front of the audience that to me, Steve Macadam is like a unicorn. I'm not sure, as a very accomplished CEO, if he liked that or not, but I think of him as such an unusual, rare type of person, someone who has a traditional business background, a Harvard MBA, worked as a consultant at McKinsey, and at the same time has wholly and enthusiastically, and I would go so far as to say fervently, embraced a path of personal development, not just for himself, but in his leadership of organizations. At EnPro, which is a large publicly traded manufacturing company, he introduced the notion of the company operating on dual bottom lines. And I wanted to start our conversation, Steve, by having you explain to our listeners what a dual bottom line is and how you came from a traditional business career to operate with a dual bottom line as your focus.
Yeah, okay. Well, hey, Tami, and thanks for having me on this. The dual bottom line, technically, is just the view that performance of the company, financial performance of the company, and the development of people are held at equal levels of importance. So one is not subordinate to the other. I often use the term they're two sides of the same coin, depending on what side you want to look at. Now, that said, we actually didn't really say, the dual bottom line, that terminology came to describe our overall operating model, operating philosophy system, which is actually much bigger and more involved and detailed, which I'd love to take a minute to describe if okay, because the dual bottom line is almost a colloquial descriptor of that we came to after some period of time, used inside the company by everyone to kind of just describe this overall notion of the type of company we were trying to build. And the type of company we're trying to build really was built around the formal purpose of enabling the full release of human possibility, and with three important values: safety, excellence, and respect. And respect really points to human dignity and the equality of all people. And a governance model that is built on federalism, meaning dual citizenship of affiliation with one's operating plant or operating division, as well as EnPro, as well as the notion, as Charles Handy called it, of subsidiarity, which pushes the responsibility down to the closest kind of unit of action, if you will. And the other key governance element is the notion of council governance. And it's a distributed authority and power model. And then underneath that overall purpose, values, and governance sits our principles and then our operating system. And our principles really have to do with leadership and beliefs that we hold about leaders, beliefs about our worldview, beliefs about people, and beliefs about economic value. And under each of those four categories, there are 4 or 5 key sub-elements that articulate those principles more fully in terms of what we believe as a company and how we've tried to organize. And then underneath that, our operating system is specific to EnPro and includes what we believe is important for how we do innovation, sales and operations planning, manufacturing, strategy, and human development. And that's all wrapped up. And so you take each one of those elements, and there are then lower level principles, practices, beliefs about each of those, what it takes to do each of those in an excellent way. And many business people will be very familiar with many of the elements, and some of them are a bit unique to us in terms of how we thought about it. So that whole picture, if you will, is what became known over time as the dual bottom line model.
Well, there's a lot in that, Steve, and over the course of our conversation, I want to bring forward some of the highlights. But to begin with, tell our listeners a bit about your own journey from being a more traditional financial performance-oriented leader to being a leader who embraced this more rich, complex, human-based, this is my language, type of organization with a dual bottom line.
Yeah, well, I guess it wasn't a big, huge epiphany that came to me one day, Tami. It was over my whole life and career, starting very young, when I grew up in a very modest household in a small steel town in southern Ohio, and started working, to make money when I was in 6th or 7th grade, passing papers and cutting grass and so forth. So it was a very blue collar town. There was one high school, went to school with children of blue collar families who were friends of mine and so forth. So, and then, and so even from that very young age, I was very comfortable around people that did work with their hands. And even in my jobs, summer jobs and first jobs as a mechanical engineer, I worked at DuPont and worked, shoulder to shoulder with mechanics and pipe fitters and millwrights in chemical plant. And really it was, I didn't kind of know it at the time, but as I look back on it, those were very formative years, because I spent a lot of time with people who did such a good job when it came down to the actual task. And some of these people had poor reputation with management as people that weren't committed and so forth. But I worked with them, and when we got to an actual task, whether it was aligning a pump or installing a seal or whatever the task was, they were very, very good, and they cared a lot about doing that job very, very well. And so I started to become interested without really knowing it in, well, why does the company treat them like kind of a, dishonest, misbehaving teenager, if you will, right? With all these rules and requirements and doubt that they're going to, the working assumption is that they're trying to screw off more than do a good job. And that's not the experience that I had. And so then, time continued to evolve. I went to, as you mentioned, I went to business school at Harvard. Was lucky enough to have Chris Argyris as one of my professors. He was one of the guys that Peter Senge really studied under and learned about and wrote about as part of the fifth discipline. It was right around when Peter was coming out, when he came out with the fifth discipline. I remember reading that book, and a light bulb went off in my head and said, wow, that's how companies really should run. And so then started to work at McKinsey, and worked at McKinsey for 10 years, serving a whole range of different clients, mostly focused on operations work. It was always strategy, but a lot of operations work, working with, I worked with a European automotive company in an assembly factory, worked with pulp and paper companies in paper mills and box plants, and worked with electric utility company in coal and gas burning plants and nuclear power plants. So I worked with frontline folks of all degrees, and what we did is we mobilized. We were working to mobilize the problem-solving capability of those frontline groups that we would bring together and facilitate problem-solving teams to identify improvement opportunities and so forth. And I came away with so many insights about how much kind of latent potential resided in these parts of the company that were just left without a process like this, left virtually untapped, because the way the companies ran really prevented that type of initiative taking and creativity and teamwork and so forth. It certainly wasn't built in a proactive way. At best, the clients I worked with, it was neutral, and somebody could do something if they really took initiative and were like that. But in many cases, it was actually, kind of held back, if you will. And so then after after I left McKinsey, I went to the operating world, became a leader, became then CEO at a pretty young age. I was 41 years old, and wanted to have the organization really involved in helping improve the way we ran. And so originally at that time in my career, it wouldn't have been a dual bottom line model. It would have been a very people-oriented model, and it would have been developmental, and hey, let's include people, let's educate them, let's treat people right, let's have good values, let's have good a good purpose, et cetera, et cetera. However, that is all to the end of making more money, making the business successful, right? And I'd say that's where many really good companies today sit. They care a lot about people. They treat people right. They bring talent in. They develop it, and they expect it to perform and perform better for the company. And the shift that I made once getting to EnPro was this full notion of the equality of that those were not different, because when people believe, I think, when people believe broadly that they're being invested in, but they are being somehow treated as means to an end, as opposed to an end unto themselves, it's different. There's still a little bit of, we management, we're better than you, we're smarter than you, we get to set the rules. We do set the rules. You follow. You do what you're told. Yeah, we'll involve you and so forth, but to a limit. And I saw that as capping what was truly possible for people to create and do and produce. And I also didn't square with how I view the world, which is, and as I'm going along in this, I started doing much more personal ego development work to learn more about myself and how my ego patterns were shaped over the years. I started doing more spiritual development work of really clarifying my own beliefs and what was really important to me and how I wanted to live my life. And a big part of that is my view of the kind of sacredness of every human being, every soul that's on this earth. And that, that's, I believe, again, that's how we're made. That's how that's how we should relate to each other, with that level of kind of love and compassion and equality. And so that's what then I said, there's got to be a better way to run a company that acknowledges that, a type of company that the vast majority of people would love to work in, because they would be treated so well. They would be trusted. They would be actually seen as ends unto themselves, right? Yes, they know they have a job, of course, and we know we have to be successful as a company. And we use our work in the company and that drive for excellence to help make people better, because people working better together, listening to each other, being more authentic, et cetera, is what leads to better execution on problems, opportunities, more creativity, more intuition anyway, right? So it all works together. And that's where we came up with this new model that then at the end became known as the dual bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Well, Steve, as you're talking, first of all, I notice my heart enlarges. It rises in me as you talk about people being ends in themselves, and that there's a real distinction here. And I want to get into it a little bit because it might seem subtle, but I think it's really important. The distinction between let's develop the people in our organization, let's train them, let's teach people mindfulness so we can make more money. That's different than saying the development of people is an end in and of itself. And I think my discovery of you and our growing friendship, part of the reason it's been so meaningful to me is that I thought, well, Tami, you think that way and you run a nice small company in Boulder, Colorado that publishes spiritual wisdom teachings. So you have the luxury of thinking that way. But here you are, you're under the pressure of public markets and giving shareholder return on a quarterly basis. And you held that up as an ethos that people are ends in themselves, and it worked for you. So that's what I want to get at, this distinction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, was there a question in there, or you want me to just talk about it more?
Well, I want you to talk more about it because I think a lot of companies, and even companies who are sending people to the new Inner MBA program that Sounds True has created, this 9-month certification program, are like, great, I want the people who go to this program to become more emotionally intelligent so we can make more money. And, that's part of why the program appeals to people. And there's value in that. But I often notice something in me gets a little tweaked.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, no, that's not it. You're not quite on it. So I guess I'm just looking for some dialogue with you on this point.
Right. Well, look, I believe that that there is an equality to people and a potential that resides in kind of the human capacity. And at the kind of level of everyone's soul, I believe we are all looking for the same thing. And what is that? It's we want to be seen. I don't want to be seen as superior to you, nor do I want to be seen as inferior to you, right? I want the freedom to be able to express my own authentic self without any fear of judgment or condemnation or, etc. And I want to be able to assume that you have integrity in that. I want to be included. We want to be included. We want to feel physically and psychologically safe when we're together. We don't want to feel abused or at risk. I want to be acknowledged, and I want to be able to use my talents. I want to be able to bring my full self into whatever situation we're talking about. Obviously, I want to be treated fairly. I want to, and I want to have others listen to me. And by the way, I'll be accountable for my actions. I want you to help hold me accountable, right? And so these are companies don't install these descriptors or these into people. This is how people come, right? This is how people are. And so we believe in EnPro that people we need to organize our governance, our ways of working, our ways of coming together as teams, our ways of interacting and communicating, and every process and practice in the company has to be aligned with the view that that's how people are going to be treated. We believe that people are, as we use the term inside of EnPro, hardwired to learn. That people want to learn and be challenged. This has been proven to me over and over and over again. I say to the guys, I said, show me, you take me. You think there's somebody in our company that doesn't have these characteristics? I said, I want you to take me to them, because I have not yet met the person, Tami, who wants to go home at the end of the day and say to their loved one, it was really mediocre today. That's not how we're wired. We are wired for excellence. We want to be proud of ourselves. We want others to be proud of us. We want to do a good job. And so in EnPro, we try to design our daily work that in a way that this learning muscle is always being used. It's always being used, but it's being used in an environment that's very supportive. Everybody's being authentic with each other. We're able to give and receive assessments from each other that help us get better. And it's not in a, kind of threatening, judgment, power-based way, right? So when we do that, then the organization just flourishes. We do think of more creative things. We take more risks. We win more on this. The organization learns. The pace of learning inside of EnPro is phenomenal. And in fact, Ed Hess, I've mentioned to you before, he's a business professor down at Darden, has written a couple of great books, Learn or Die, about companies, and then also a recent book called Humility's the New Smart. Well, he's working on a book right now called something about hyper-learning. That's probably the title, hyper-learning, and he's going to use EnPro as one of his case examples, because the individual and organizational learning is at such a fast pace because it's wired in to do that. So this does lead to better financial performance. There's no it doesn't have to be seen as, that is why we're doing it. It's not why we're doing it. We've had people inside our company, and I can think of two off the top of my head, who one of them was doing a great job for our company, and it was the woman, and she had always aspired to be a psychologist. So we paid for her to go to school at night. She worked on it. She did a great job for us while she worked at the company, was a coach, was head of HR for one of our businesses, and volunteered at a children's crisis center. And then when she got her degree, that's what she went and did. And we all felt great about that, right? We had another individual, a senior sales executive, one of our top people in the division, direct report to a division president, doing fantastic, responsible for all kinds of sales, right? He went through our centerpiece leadership development program that I taught twice. I've told you about this. I taught it twice a year with others. And it was an opportunity for people to really begin looking at their selves, their own purpose, their own ego behavior, and what was really important to them, and so forth. And he realized that he and his wife had adopted 3 Russian children several years before this. And he had told his wife when they did it, if it ever became too much for her, he would change his career and be home more, because he had to travel a lot in this job. And so at this program, he realized that that time had come, because one of the kids in particular was a little older when he was adopted and had issues that needed a father around. And so he left. He's a very good friend of mine. I talk to him frequently. How could any organization say that's not a good thing for this person and humanity and the way we want to operate, right? So when leaders have that attitude of caring, when EnPro has that attitude of caring for others and wanting to do wanting to support people in what they determine is best for them, that's just a winning formula.
Mm-hmm. When you look back at your 12 years at EnPro, what would you say were the practices or the new ways of operating that you're the most proud of, that were the most innovative?
Specific ways of operating. So we call those, practices and processes. And I think one of the most powerful is what we called authentic community building. And it's really effective. It's a team coming together and working effectively together. And there's, Scott Peck, Scott Peck was probably one of the leading developers of community practice. And we leaned heavily on him and heavily on a guy that was his understudy that we brought into the company to help us, a guy named Kaz Gods, who's written stuff as well. But we learned a process called community building, and we named it that specifically because the normal language around team building and team effectiveness and so forth has some baggage with it. And frankly, I've done it both as a leader and as a participant, as a team member. I've done the ropes course and the this and that. That's generally many people, put it under the category of team building. I don't think it works anyway, but community building works. And the definition of community is it's very simple: a group of individuals that have learned how to communicate honestly with each other, and they have deep relationships and a significant commitment to each other. Right? They like to. Its members will share in each other's successes and failures. Right? It's a very authentic and safe environment. If you talk to one of our people and you'd say, what's it like to be part of whatever community? Any given person would be part of a number of different teams, councils, we call them, where they would have done and actively do this community building practice, right? So they might be on a division council that's responsible for the leadership of a specific business, or they might be on a manufacturing council or an innovation council, and some councils come and go. Some are more permanent; they're around for a while. But if we have a specific issue that we're going to tackle, like we need to redesign our benefits, our company benefits program, which we did a few years ago, we would create a new benefits council. It would do that task, and then it would more or less disband. And the councils are characterized by folks that can join and leave. It's not. There's not a hard wall around it, because it's built on these principles that we're talking about of acceptance and equality of people. So it's easy for people to join and leave without the normal, kind of social consequences of breaking up a group or trying to join a new group or so forth. And most people would describe those communities as, if you said, what's it feel like? Well, it's a psychologically safe environment. I'm here to support it. And everybody on the team feels equally responsible. They've learned, we've all learned a new type of language to take ownership of our beliefs. So we use I statements when we're making a statement of how we feel about a particular issue. And there's a number of practices associated with this, including we will sit in a circle with chairs and no tables between us, and we'll do a meditation to start, to get everyone kind of present in that space, sometimes silent, sometimes guided. We will then do a check-in where we'll have a few, and sometimes if there's not much time, and depending on the group, we'll do a one-word check-in where we'll just go around and everyone will share one word that's their current mood, or what's going on inside of them. Usually it's a check-in that allows people to say, here's what's going on for me, right now. And then there's a check out at the end, and then these rules are followed throughout the process. And the whole purpose of that is so that group has a real conversation, and that the full conversation happens in the room, not in the hallway or the so-called water cooler or coffee pot, etc. And there's disagreement in these, and everybody participates. And when people leave, they feel good about the fact that they've been fully ownership. They've had shared ownership with everyone else. They've been able to share what's on their mind. The group, typically, these groups come to an answer or direction that's far better than any one person or two people could have developed, because they kind of get in flow. And we've taught everyone how to work on themselves, manage themselves in this process. We have an expression inside of EnPro that we use frequently: I'm not my idea. So when people put forth a new idea, we've taught folks how to not be so identified with, is that right or wrong? Am I being called out on this? Does everybody agree with me or whatever? It's just an idea. It's not my idea. It's an idea. And folks build on that and talk about it. So we have the power of the collective just is huge. And so, and community can be built with small groups and large groups, and it takes time. It takes a little bit of understanding of the methods needed to do it. It's not 100% reliable, but it's pretty reliable. I'd say 75 or 80% reliable when done according to the rules and protocol and methods that we have. And when it works, it's one of the most rewarding ways for people to come together that I've ever been part of or experienced or seen. So I'd say I'd put that at the top of the list, Tami. That's one of the practices that I'm most proud of how we do things, because that's touched virtually all 6,000 of our colleagues in the company.
Now, you mentioned psychological safety, and that these councils, these communities, have a high level of psychological safety. And, there have been studies now that have shown that success of a team, the performance of a team, the number one factor that leads to that is psychological safety in the group. How were you able to create that at EnPro?
Well, I think again, I wouldn't say we're 100% successful, but we're pretty darn successful at it. And I'd say we started at the top of the company, teaching. I learned, and our top team, we all learned together. And then we became vulnerable and exposed with this process in front of the next layer. I still remember one of our experiences. It's called the fishbowl exercise. People in the inside of EnPro who are still there. This would have been, probably 10 years ago now when first time we did this. But it was our January conference. We had a top 100 people from around the world coming. And the way it worked is, so in a circle in the middle, we had a EnPro Executive Council meeting, a real meeting, not just role play, but we had a real meeting, and everyone else kind of sat around and stood around the outside, kind of looking into this quote unquote fishbowl. Right, we were there. And so we worked on some hard issues, and we challenged each other, and we went through the whole extended community building process in front of everyone else to role model. Okay, guys, this is not just fun and games. We're not just making people feel good, because normally groups come together, and we actually learned that this is what Scott Peck called pseudo community. And the characteristics of a pseudo community, which you'd find in almost any company and any group that comes together over extended periods of time, they're generally conflict avoiding, and they really try to ignore, sweep under the rug individual differences between each other, and kind of very general blanket statements are allowed without being challenged. They're pleasant, but often the proverbial white elephant is never named. That's not how communities behave. Authentic communities, it's the exact opposite. Extremely genuine and authentic. It's a conflict resolving body where individual differences are recognized and celebrated. But and so we taught it, we demonstrated it, and then we started to teach it and experiment with it. And then each of the executive council members were charged with leading both their immediate team, and then what we had when we designed our operating system in the early days, which was what I mentioned is how we do commercial activity, manufacturing, innovation, etc. We had specific councils formed with folks from across the globe, call it 10 or 12 per person, and two of my team were assigned to lead each one of those, and their job was to practice leading in a new way. One, they didn't have single point accountability. They had to share leadership with another person. And number two, there was a whole set of things that they had to practice to bring to that group the same type of community building practice and the same type of authenticity and feel as they were experiencing in the EnPro Executive Council level. And that was a real challenge for them. It took a long time. I mean, it took a couple of years to work through that in some cases. And we keep hammering it at it and keep practicing and keep talking about it and practice again and practice in public with in front of other people, so that when someone did hold back or they were challenged, and so slowly, very slowly but surely, I started to witness more people speaking truth to power, if you will, right? Well, there's two sides of that coin, right? One is the leader has to want it and support it, and has to manage their own ego in the face of it, which is not easy. And the subordinate, the lower level person, has to have the courage to speak up. And we worked on both sides of that equation, Tam. We worked very, very hard. And through these leadership development programs we did, through how we came together as an executive council on a monthly basis, and through the practice that they used with others. And then as we cascaded it down and we started to do development programs with frontline folks, we followed the same set of practices and taught at the front level the same kind of thing, where they were able to see the leadership role model and so forth. And then over my time there, as I encountered, and other leaders, as we as collective encountered folks that could not make this type of transition quick enough to meet our needs, and they held positions of power, they left the company. So that was a big part of it too.
You mentioned as the leader that you had to welcome, that's my word, but people speaking truth to power. You had to create receptivity for that. What's the journey you had to go through, Steve, very personally, in working with your own ego patterns such that you were receptive in that way?
Yeah, I think it started, Tammy, with I went to a 9-day program at an organization called Learning as Leadership. It's called Personal Mastery, and it was a 9-day program for us to each of the participants. And I went basically by myself with. I mean, this is with the company right before I joined EnPro. So I was CEO of another company when I learned about this, and went to this program. It was 9 days, very intensive, but what we did is a very, very detailed self-diagnosis of all of our past and our ego patterns. They have a very, very rigorous methodology to map this out in this kind of series of charts that all kind of connect. But basically what it is it's going back. Anyone who's been through psychotherapy, I would imagine, is very similar to this. I've never done that, but I kind of view this as psychotherapy for more or less healthy people, and going back through all the different emotional events that happened to us when we were young, mostly from our caregivers, our parents, and our family situation, families of origin, but also other sites of shaping, as Strozzi would refer to them, of authority figures and so forth. And we form these patterns of way of behaving. Now, of course, this program starts with a extensive 360 that's done by one of the LAL team, interviewing a person's feedback partners. And in my case, it included my wife and people I've worked closely with, right? And it's a pretty tough process because, they don't spend a ton of time talking about strengths. Most of it is about development needs. And what I learned in that process was like, oh my gosh, I'm not coming across with others. I'm not, working with them in a way that, quite frankly, I was very proud of. And even though I thought I was a pretty darn good leader at the time, I wasn't abusive or anything like that, but it's just these subtle things of, I was never listened to as a child. So, I want to be the one with the answers. I want to be the one who's smart. I'm trying to prove myself, right? I don't like conflict. And why don't I like it? I mean, if I had a nickel for every time my mother said, if you don't have something nice to say about somebody, don't say it. Which was one of the societal values of the time, and I came up learning that. So when I had to give one of my team members, constructive feedback, it was very, very difficult for me, and I was always looking for a way to ease out of that. Well, people know that, right? And so this is the kind of feedback that was coming to me. And so when I went into the program in the beginning, I was ready to try to understand what this was like, and it was an inflection point in my life. I really learned a lot about myself. Why was I so emotionally closed, and why did I do all these things? And that really started me down a path. And then we sent other people from that company, and I saw them beginning to work on their own patterns. And I saw the organization began to just, soften the political lines, the disagreement, and that was a different company that I think about a year after I went to the program, I ended up leaving the company to join EnPro as the CEO, and so the LAL organization has been a big part of our journey as well. So while all this other stuff I was mentioning was going on, we were sending individuals from the leadership. I'll bet we've sent 60 or 70 people over the years, over these 10 plus years. We've sent out to LAL for this 9-day program. It's expensive, so it was only those, we can only afford to do it for those where we had a lot of leverage. So all our division president, all my team has been, all the next level down leaders of the divisions, have been. And then they had a program called Shared Mastery where you would go as a team, and I took the initial team there, and then as the team changed over a number of years later, I took the team back. That's a 5-day program and really works more on the type of community. All the participants do individual work as well, but there's the whole group working together, sharing what they're learning about themselves and talking about how do these dynamics show up with each other. And so once I started down that path, I became more and more interested in that. And I think it's gotten more general business press, right? Some number of years after that, Keegan and Leahy came out with Immunity to Change, which speaks directly to that phenomenon. And the more I learned about, and then when I started to understand the power of reflection and quiet time, and started meditating again. I had meditated as a younger. When I learned it was a long time ago, but I had kind of come in and out of the practice over the years. And when I started studying the work of Dan Siegel, which I studied a lot of his stuff, much of it, as you know, through Sounds True, I started to realize, whoa, this is not just, this is essential for brain health and clarity of thinking and clarity of purpose and direction and so forth. And so I started doing that, which then took me more into my own, I would call spiritual growth, spiritual journey, where I began to try to really deeply clarify, what was important to me, and challenged many of my own mental models and beliefs of some of the past, perhaps more dogmatic ways of thinking about things into a much more softer and universal and spiritual way of thinking about the world and the universe. And as part of our program at EnPro, it was all, a big part of it was about what we came to call accessing source, which is really what Joseph Jaworski has written so much about in his book, First Synchronicity, and then the book is called Source, right, which is tapping into what he would describe as the implicate order, right, of the knowledge contained in the universe looking to emerge. And that's what the whole U theory and Otto Schomer is all about. And that's what we brought Otto in and taught us all how to follow the U process that really helps individuals work to tap their intuition because of this source of knowledge there in solving problems and in seeing emerging futures. And so it all kind of then began to build on each other, and all kind of fits together, at least in my own mind. It may not be coming out that way, but.
Steve, one of the things that's so interesting to me when you talk about accessing source and tapping intuition, I imagine employees being trained in that if they're working in Silicon Valley. They have to learn mindfulness meditation and know what's emerging in the field for the future. But here you have 6,000 plus factory workers and you're teaching them meditation and how to access source and intuition to improve the quality and their performance and their own depth of experience working in manufacturing plants. And that's what is so astounding to me. How were you able to introduce meditation at that level to factory workers?
Yeah, that was a challenge, still is a challenge. Some kind of hardcore. I mean, it takes some time for folks to get a little bit more comfortable with it, right? We don't push. We have a centering, as we call it, at the beginning of team meetings, where in the beginning it's just 3 minutes of silence for everyone to kind of just collect together. But going into the, as called, the implicate order, it sounds too fancy, right? If you read a normal business book, it would call entering the state of flow as a team, right? Well, how do you do that? Well, it requires this authentic community context as well, right? I don't care what one would call it, but it has to be an environment of psychological safety. It has to be an environment where people are all participating, where they feel ownership, et cetera. And so that then, along with the quiet time, the reflection, not always being in a hurry, allowing everybody to talk, slowing down the mental process, building on each other, and so forth and so on, it emerges, right, over time. And folks, the more folks do it, the more comfortable they become. I could tell you so many fun examples, Tami, that I have of I'm thinking of one manufacturing process right now where we make one of our flagship ceiling products up in Palmyra, New York, called Gylon, and it's cut into gaskets that are used in, it's the best in the industry, used in high performance, high temperature, and highly corrosive environments. And it basically seals two gaskets, right, in some kind of a pipeline system with a chemical or something that you don't want to leak. It can't leak. And we would produce it in big sheets, and then we send these sheets out to gasket cutters around the country who are our distributors, and they cut it into gaskets and deliver it to chemical plants. And for years when I got there, they had always struggled with these big sheets. I don't remember exactly how big, but they might be 80 inches across the width, and maybe let's call them 80 by 80 inches. So they're big sheets, but they would come out very wavy, and that would kind of come and go, and we could never solve the problem through the traditional problem-solving tools. Well, in those problem-solving tools were what you would see in many organizations, engineers leading a sophisticated design of experiments type of method, and getting people together, putting the ideas, et cetera, et cetera. Well, finally, we approached it with this new way of thinking. This has been a number of years now, and sure enough, the team came up with a way to permanently solve the problem. We haven't had the problem for, I can't even remember, 5, 6 years. Mm-hmm. And so here's a process that's been around for 30 years, Tami, of how we do this, right? And it was one of these things where, it's more art than science and so forth, and people run it different. Yeah, I mean, these are the things you run into in factories. And just, we're in the truck parts business. We make parts for the wheel end of semi trucks, the oil seals and hubcaps and braking systems and suspension and so forth, everything that would go into the wheel end of a Class 8 commercial vehicle, right? One year, that business has been around for probably 60 years, right? And we've been producing these core products for a long time, right? 1 year, that team introduced 12 new products. I mean, where did they come from? I mean, I would have never thought of 12 and got them all introduced into the marketplace in 1 year. And this was just 1 year. And when we first started this new way of thinking about innovation and bringing people together, and frankly got comfortable with more risk, with the organization taking more risk because we trusted people more.
Mm-hmm. Now, interestingly, you said just specifically about the meditation practice that you've introduced in these groups. You call it centering. That makes a lot of sense to me. But then you said 3 minutes of silence or a guided practice. You know, it sounds true. We do a 1 minute, good minute practice. And what I notice, especially with new people, is at about 30 seconds, you can see people starting to squirm. Like 1 minute, that sounds true. In Boulder, Colorado, right. 3 minutes of silence, that's a long time, Steve, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's great. Seriously, though, when did our society get to a point where an individual that's in a group of people has to feel uncomfortable sitting with their eyes closed for 3 minutes of silence? When did that happen? Because I don't think it's good for our society. I think that people, to be with themselves and to be comfortable with themselves and comfortable with their own interior world, it's just such a huge gift to give people. And it's not something to be feared or avoided. It's something to be embraced and celebrated. And oh my gosh, yeah, all this stuff is going on, all this mental mind chatter. What's it all mean? Why is it? How does it drive me? What? All these kinds of things. This is what we talk about. So anyway, go ahead.
Let's take this one more moment, Steve. How did you get thousands of people comfortable with this? What kind of, centering, I get that language. How else are you, indoctrinating me into a cult? I'm not comfortable with this. This is religious, all the normal objections that people have.
Yeah. Well, we didn't start it across the board on day one. We started with the senior team. We practiced over time. We cascaded it down. It fit into the larger purpose of what we were trying to do with the company and shape the company. So folks saw others do it. Then when we got to individual factories, we would typically, we'd form up into what we call core teams, which were folks that would begin to come together in this council kind of format that I just described. And we would start slowly at a site. And we didn't really force people. We said, here's what we're going to do. And we had enough courageous people that led in that. And I don't mean leaders. I mean, frontline operators and so forth. And as we started to have successes, we talked about it and brought more visibility to it. It became more common. It would spread at that site. We would share it across other sites. I'll give you an example. So there's no rocket science to it. It's just sticking to it over a long period of time. But it was so rewarding because as a CEO, most of the times when I hear from a frontline person, it's not good news, right? It's a complaint about something or whatnot. So one time I go into my office. We were probably 2 years into our transformation, and we had rolled it out. We'd started at the top, and I went around and did a series of community building sessions with cross-functional folks, and kind of a diagonal slice, if you will. So I would go to a given site, depending on its size, and I would spend a day, and I would run 4 community building practices. And I would start those, Tammy, by reading the Rabbi's Gift, which is the preface to Scott Peck's book, The Different Drum. And it really is it's a mythical story about acceptance of others, no matter what they bring to the table. It's a very good little story, and it's a short little story. It'd take about 5 minutes to read. And after getting the group together, we would do a centering that I would lead. Okay, and many times this was their first experience with a centering. We'd do a centering, and then I would read this story. Okay, and then I would just sit there, and I would start by saying, how did that strike you? And I would redirect the conversation into the middle of the room instead of with me. And there might be 15 to 20 people in the room. And folks would start talking about it. What was meaningful to them in this story? What were the insights they gained? What did they like about it? What did they not like about it? And so forth. So they could be honest talking about just a mythical story, right? And then after maybe 20, 25 minutes of that, I would say to them, what would it mean to create? So, and for that 20, 25 minutes, I haven't said a word. And if there's silence, like if somebody says something, one of the principles of community building is to respect silence. So I literally would not say a word. We'd sometimes sit there for 5, 7 minutes before the next person would chime in, but slowly people would realize, okay, I'm going to share something. Talk about pregnant pauses. I mean, this was it. And so then about 20, 25 minutes in, I would say, well, what would it be like to have that type of environment here at work? That was the only question I would pose. And then the group would start talking about what was really going on in their group, in that site. Now, here we have people, supervisors, department leaders, hourly folks from all across, start having, for the first time ever, an honest conversation. And it wasn't a gripe session. And it was, an honest conversation about what it's like to work there. And then they would go on for some period of time, and I would then begin to engage, to have people begin to, as they felt more comfortable, begin to elaborate on different things, right? And so, anyway, I did that with a group at one of these sites, and it had to be probably 6 or 9 months later. I'm in my office in Charlotte. I go into my room. I've got a voicemail. I listen to the voicemail, and it's this guy. He says, Steve, you don't know me. My name is Gregory Johnson, and I work in the high-pressure sheet group again, this is also up at Palmyra, New York. And I've been at this company for 25 years. And you don't know me, and I just thought you should know it's working. You came up here 6 or 9 months ago and read us a story about the rabbi. And I just thought somebody should tell you it's working. And then he hung up. That was it. And so my next visit, I called him and got him on the phone. And I went up there not too long after that for a visit and sat down with him and other members of that team. And I said, what's going on, guys? And they were, to a person in that team, they were excited. They said the whole place is, we feel like we're owners of this. We get to work on the things that we think are important. We're changing it. We're making it better. And by the way, we're producing more sheets. Our costs are down, et cetera, et cetera. Now that's after a lot of work with the division president and all the leaders between the division president and this team. And this is a couple of years into it. And so what I did, Tammy, you're saying, how did we get this kind of practice spread around? So I did a global town hall meeting from that site with that team. And so here we are. We did virtual town hall meetings, and I was sitting there with those guys. And I said, "Okay, guys, tell me what you're so excited about. What you've been doing, how you've been working together. What do you think about it, right?" And then able to ask questions of them, their colleagues, able to ask questions that you normally wouldn't ask in front of the boss, right? Because they might embarrass the boss. Questions like, "What do you do with all that meditation crap? How's that working? I don't like that," right? And they'd say, "Well, we center, and we've grown to think it's helpful to us because we kind of just calm down. We're coming in off the floor. We're meeting in a room. It's good to just take some time to kind of settle in. And yeah, we like to check in because we get to find out what's going on. We know each other. We know our colleagues better now. We've worked with them for 25 years, and we know them better now after a few months of doing this than we have at 25 years. That doesn't mean we necessarily our friends, we're going to go hang out outside the workplace, but by gosh, we can work together. So this is the kind of things that here, and so this is on the town hall, we actually did, and so others around the world see this. It's their own people speaking to them, and they're able to say, yeah, it gets a little bit more credibility. So it's all of these pieces, Tami, that have to be consistently done over many, many years to really move an organization of our size and complexity, because as you know, we're spread out all over the world.
Mm-hmm. We know, as I mentioned in the beginning, Steve, I find you a very unusual person and so grateful for our relationship and grateful that you are a contributing faculty member to the Inner MBA. You'll be teaching on authentic community building as part of the virtual program of the Inner MBA. It's a 9-month certificate program. Sounds True has created it in partnership with LinkedIn, Wisdom 2.0, and graduates get a certificate from a division of NYU called Mindful NYU. The program begins in September of this year, 2020. It runs through May of 2021. And for people who are interested, you can find out more at innermbaprogram.com. Steve, before we conclude our conversation, just one final question for you. The Inner MBA is designed for business professionals to come and have 9 months of the type of training you've been pointing to as you talk about the transformation that you led at EnPro. And when you gave a talk recently at the Inner MBA Hub at the recent Wisdom 2.0 conference, you talked about what you called a leader's essential development imperative. And really what you pointed to, and this is a quote, that whatever the level of development of the leader is of any unit, of any manufacturing plant, of any division or company, that sets the limit to the development level of that organizational group. And to end our conversation, I wonder if you can just comment on that point. Because I think sometimes people think, well, the organization, it can grow and it can thrive even if the leader is unconscious in XYZ or not committed to the development. But you're pointing to something quite different here.
Yeah, and that's not something I've ever, I don't remember ever reading. It's something that I've kind of come to just in my observation. And again, it's as I call it, the collective development of the organization, not necessarily the development level of any individual in that group. But whether it's a plant and it's a plant manager or a shift supervisor, or as you said, a company or a division, the division president, it's just that in the model that we have, and we don't have time now to talk about self-management and so forth, but we just live in a society and in our companies where there is some level of hierarchical structure, and I don't think it's bad. It's an efficient way to organize and conduct things. And leaders have a real role to play, but because of the power and authority that goes along with that role, and sometimes it's visible and you can see it. Sometimes it's very, very subtle. But because of that, I've just come to have a strong point of view that leader, wherever they are in their inner capacity and inner development level, sets the cap on that organization. And that's why I've been so excited about the Inner MBA since you first told me about it some number of months ago, because it's exactly the types of behaviors and insights and practice that we've been working on for a decade at EnPro. And I hope people see it, for what it is. But if someone really aspires to have a great organization, this type of work, whether they do the Inner MBA or do it some other way, is absolutely essential in my view.
And Steve, when you say a leader's inner development, I just want you to define that, if you will, how you would define that for our listeners. I think sometimes people hear that and they're like, what? Inner development? That sounds a little vague. What is that?
Yeah, well, it's, when I was speaking out there at the hub, I used a guy named Barrett Brown's definition, and he called it vertical learning. And it really is how someone thinks, how someone interprets situations, how a person handles complexity and ambiguity, how a person cultivates relationships and works in, it's basically their own kind of their own operating system, right? So just like a PC, if you want to draw an analogy, it's the operating system of a leader, and it is driven by these unconscious drivers of the ego that need to be sorted out and understood. It's driven by the clarity that leader has around what they want to create and where that comes from in them, right? So that's very deep work. That's very personal work, and so very reflective and contemplative type of work to come to this, right? And that's what then ends up inspiring and motivating and creating, a better, kind of great, enduring organization. And so that's how I think about the notion of inner development, Tammy.
Again, I've been speaking with Steve Macadam. He's one of the CEOs and conscious business trainers who are participating in Sounds True's new Inner MBA program. And if you want to find out more, just go to innermbaprogram.com. Steve, thank you for your friendship and for all that I learned from you, and such a joy to be able to share you with the Insights at the Edge audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you for listening to Insights at the Edge. You can read a full transcript of today's interview at soundstrue.com/podcast. And if you're interested, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app. And also, if you feel inspired, head to iTunes and leave Insights at the Edge a review. I love getting your feedback, being in connection with you, and learning how we can continue to evolve and improve our program. Working together, I believe, we can create a kinder and wiser world. SoundsTrue.com, waking up the world.